What is up, everyone? Good morning. It's your host again, Carlos Ponce, and this is another live episode of Advancio Talks. And if you are just discovering us, welcome. But if you've been here since the very beginning, since 2022, well, you know what we are about. Advancio Talks is where we sit down with the people actually building the future of business and technology. Not just talking about it, but doing it. CTOs, founders, the folks making decisions that matter. So whether you're drinking coffee, commuting, or just curious about what's actually happening in tech, stick around because today we got Scott Lowry, founder of Know Your Forest, with us today. Scott's got stories and insights you won't hear anywhere else. So let's jump right in. Welcome to the show, Scott. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Carlos. Happy to be here. And yeah, a little bit about me. Born and
Please,
raised
all
in
means, introduce
Utah.
yourself.
And yeah, I've been an entrepreneur from a young age, running, mowing lawns and then getting other folks to mow lawns. And I would just kind of go and check up on them. And then grew up on a golf course. So I ended up selling a lot of golf balls on the 17th hole. Right as people were entering that 18th hole, they were either really excited or really down and gave me a lot of money, which was really great. And that entrepreneurship just kind of continued to blossom, through my teens and as I graduated high school. But I'm married, got one daughter, and love the outdoors. I still skateboard to kind of keep me young, and I love to trail run. So a little bit about me.
That's great. Yeah, I can relate to the skateboarding part because I roller skate at such a ripe age. I still roller skate. I'm not
Nice.
going to date myself, but I was roller skating in the '80s. All right. Anyway, so let's talk about Know Your Force. Tell us a little bit about the company. What is your value prop, and what? Tell us a little bit about the company, please.
Yeah, Know Your Force started back in 2020. Our mission is to bridge the gap in communication between law enforcement and their community. And I've been in private sector working at, large tech companies for 10, 15 years. And so I see a lot of technology, but in the public sector, they don't have as great of technology.
Uh-huh.
They have a lot of legacy systems. And so in 2020, when all of the heartache happened with George Floyd, I ran into a buddy who was running a canine unit here locally, and I was like, "Hey, how are things going?" And he
Mhm.
was like, "Oh, I just got back from a week of training. Like, oh, I'm so excited to get out on the streets." And was like, "Oh, I just got done running a global sales training program for a tech company, and I was
Mhm.
able to help some small partners get recognized just from all the training they were doing." So a
Mhm.
light bulb went off, and I was like, "Oh, tell me about how much training you do." And he helped me understand that canine officers do about 3 times the amount of training as a regular officer. But I still had this idea of like, oh, well, what if people knew how much training officers were doing? So when you got pulled over, you could feel comfortable. Hey, this officer that's pulling me over, has done their training. And so the name of the company is Know Your Force, Know Your Law Enforcement.
Mhm.
So that was kind of how the business started. Was I initially wanted to get training data out to the public so they could know their force and know who they were interacting with. And I come from my father-in-law was in law enforcement for 30 plus years. So from July 2020 to January 2021, I talked to lots of chiefs and sheriffs. They helped me understand that training reports get out to the public through annual reports and whatnot. But what I was hearing from them is they want to know how the community feels about them. And I was like, oh, well, instead of someone scanning a QR code and learning about their force, they could scan a QR code and provide feedback. And so that's how the company came to be. And candidly, we
Mhm.
haven't changed much since the company started. It's very simple technology that's all over in the private sector. We're overwhelmed with reviews and providing feedback, but in the public sector, it's very rare. And so
Mhm.
it's an awesome overlap of using simple technology to bridge the gap. And then it did evolve a little bit into sending out text messages. If someone doesn't want to
Mhm.
scan a QR code, we can send a text message out. But that's how it started, and it's been awesome. It's been really great helping cities use simple technology to gather more data. And now with AI,
Mhm.
right, they can pull our data into their AI and LLMs, to look at data in various ways. But yeah, it's a little bit about how the company started and what we're doing.
Great. Yeah, I understand that the Know Your Force was built to close. a gap, by capturing post-contact feedback in real time, right? So that leaders can identify issues before they become crises, right? So, what made you think of this? Why tackle this in particular?
Yeah. So in 2020, I got let go from the tech company I was working at, and I was like, oh man, I want to build technology that's doing something for our community, not just another app that is going to maybe get people's attention and suck up time and maybe make money. But it truly was, I wanted to build technology that was for a bigger purpose. And so it's always been mission based. I've started other companies in the past, and when money was the first thing I was looking at, I was always crunching numbers. They didn't ever tend to work out as well as I wanted them to. And with this one, it wasn't about the money. I truly just wanted to solve a problem with simple technology. I saw so much technology in the private sector, and I just wanted to pull a little bit of that technology into the public sector with everything that was going on. I saw that there was a crisis going on, and I wanted to help how I could. So I'm not a developer per se, but I've always worked with developers. I was always managed, development teams or development projects, and so luckily I was able to connect with a buddy who does, build technology and share kind of what I'm looking to do. But it was always mission based, trying to use simple technology.
Okay. So I understand that you believe that information flows more honestly between people who need to understand each other. So why is the post interaction window so critical?
Yeah, that's a great question. And there's always been, census surveys or, community surveys that get sent out. And we were actually part of a publication from the National Institute of Justice in 2022, where they looked at all of the different survey mechanisms that cities and counties were using. And they identified that post contact feedback is the most valuable feedback because it's right after an interaction with someone. If someone gets a survey, but they haven't interacted with law enforcement, they might be providing feedback on what they're seeing on the TV and what's going on and what they're hearing is going on with law enforcement rather than their actual interactions. And
Right.
so being able to capture that data in the moment, someone doesn't have to find a website, find a formal complaint form or a commendation form, put in all of their different information, right? We just simplify that process so that we
Mhm.
get a higher rate of engagement. And what we see, it hasn't changed over the last 6 years, is 75 to 80% of the feedback is positive, which a lot of
Mhm.
people wouldn't think. But that's a lot of those day-to-day interactions where someone might get a citation, but the officer was nice. The officer helped them understand why they were getting pulled over, whatever it may be. And so even if they do get a ticket, if the officer is kind, they provide positive feedback. And
Mhm.
that's not captured. That's not easy to gather. And so that's why that post contact is so critical and such rich data.
Right. Right. All right. So here's what I'm hearing. I understand we're talking about data builds trust, right? So that's like the focus of the conversation. In other words, engineering transparency between law enforcement and the communities they serve. Okay. So that being said, how does the feedback look like? I mean, like, how does it all work?
Yeah, that has evolved in terms of who has access and when can they see it and what are the notifications that get sent out. And a lot of the evolution actually came from there has been legislation that's been passed in various states that are looking for early intervention systems. And the first step is to get law enforcement agencies out of paper and into a digital repository so that they can get notifications when assets are uploaded so that they can know when to look at data. So a lot of the bills are just saying, hey, instead of having an actual file with a paper complaint, that needs to be uploaded. And when
Mhm.
a threshold is hit of complaints, a notification can get sent out for a sergeant or lieutenant to look at those and possibly pull that officer in for an early intervention meeting before something tragic happens. So
Mhm.
that's nationwide what a lot of states and cities are looking for is get digital, get thresholds and notifications set up. And that's great. But what we're doing is still right after an interaction, someone can scan a QR code or receive a text message. And if they leave a 1 or 2 star, that immediately can send a notification to a lieutenant or a sergeant, which then prompts them to look at body cam. So our tool actually prompts more usage of other public sector tools, which is awesome. Um, but the feedback loop is dependent on the rating. So if there is a 1 or 2, something critical comes in, it doesn't even have to, our threshold is a 1 or 2 star, rating rather than 4 or 5 complaints building up. And if that comes in, then, multiple people up the command staff can receive a notification, review immediately what came in, and they receive an email with that. And then, they can watch body cam and decide what they do with it. So that's kind of the first level of the feedback loop, is if it is critical, something can come in. And the way that we typically set it up is, lieutenants and sergeants should get the 1s and 2s. We don't want to immediately escalate it to a chief or a sergeant with the 1 or 2. Let the frontline leadership take that and evaluate if they need to bring it up to the chain to a sergeant or a lieutenant, or to a chief or a sheriff. We actually typically see the chiefs or the sheriffs, they get the 4s and the 5s. And so when they're walking around, they can share that positive morale. Hey, we saw you helped this person. You were really kind to that, lady and her son, and you helped keep them calm, right? Those positive affirmations that they can share with the force from a top-down leadership really helps the morale, helps the officers see that, hey, I should keep going. Oh, hey, I should keep my tone in check, right? A lot of what we see is, hey, his or her tone was, a little rough. So the star rating can kind of go in various ways, but then outside of the star rating and getting those immediate notifications, we have a dashboard where, a patrol lieutenant can see just his patrol officers, and he can see the average rating, the percent positive. And then he can, of course, filter down, by a shift or by an officer specifically, by a date range, right? Maybe something happened in their community and they want to look at a date range if something changed. So the dashboard gives an overall view. And then the last level of kind of the feedback loop that we just got going last year was allowing the officers to get in and actually see their reviews. Before, it was always just a leadership tool where the leadership had access. The leadership would then, get the information out to the command staff as needed. But we've heard from agencies, hey, we want the officers to actually go in and be able to see their data so that they can self-correct maybe before a threshold is hit, and someone has to pull them in. And so last year we enabled for officers to just see their data. So they can log in, they can see, the assets that they have stored on them, and, the feedback that's coming in from the community. And we've heard from a few that the spouses of the officer like to see that, because sometimes if the officer sees it, they kind of just keep it to themselves. But if their spouse sees it, their spouse can help remind them, hey, you're doing a good job out there, like keep going. And that's really what we're trying to do, is we want officers to stay officers. We want officers to recognize the good that they're doing and propel that forward. And if anything tragic comes in, we want to obviously identify that and help them, remedy that. But there again, what we see is we're trying to balance the scales with, not just always getting formal complaints.
Right.
Those day-to-day interactions are typically positive. And so we want those positive interactions to be surfaced. But that's kind of the feedback loop.
Okay.
We have agencies testing it with sending out maybe multiple notifications to citizens. Hey, how was your interaction? A follow-up 30 days later. Hey, has anything changed? That's more of an investigation route. But the feedback loop, it's pretty seamless, right? Immediate. You can take a look at it on a dashboard, and then the officers or deputies can look at it in real time as well.
Great. Yeah, absolutely. And here's another thing that I was thinking is, I understand that, there's two parts to this. You have, on one side, you have the officers, and then on the other side, you have the community members who need to trust that the system isn't biased towards either side. So how do you design neutrality?
Yeah. So some agencies opt into showing their public-facing dashboard. So the dashboard that the chiefs and sheriffs can look at that shows the percent positive, that can be enabled, and they can push that onto their public-facing website so the community can see that. Outside of showing the data publicly, we do have it. If an SMS is sent out, then that ensures that every citizen that has an engagement with law enforcement receives that text message. The QR code definitely can be up to the officer if they don't pass it out or not. But what we see, is if a policy is passed, and if we have a templated Lexipol policy that we share with our agencies, but if a policy is passed, the officer is required to pass this QR code out, based on whatever the interaction type is, right? Sometimes they decide that if it's a violent offense, then the QR code isn't passed out. But same thing, when we set up our SMS services, we can say on this call type, they receive a text message. And
Mhm.
so that's really the way that we've been able to help ensure that everybody gets an opportunity to provide that feedback, and it's not biased, as well as most people do just put our link on their website, so it's next to the complaint form. You can file a formal complaint, or you can provide, a general piece of feedback, which might convert into a formal complaint. Um, but that's how we've handled it so far, and it's worked very well.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. Okay, so we're talking about the functionality and some other non-technical considerations, but there's also, of course, there's also a technical component. So I would like to ask you, when creating when creating this solution, this alternative, this platform, what would you say are the critical architecture decisions that must be, you know, brought into the equation so that everything functions seamlessly?
Yeah. This comes from, my experience of 10, 15 years of building applications with multiple customers, is making sure you have minimal tech debt. And what I mean by that is, if you talk to one customer, they might say, hey, I need X, Y, Z, A, B, they might have a lot of features. And if you build all of those features for every customer that you talk to, you end up getting a large system that can fit a lot of different use cases, but the usage of those features inside the tool are very minimal. And so there's too much going on. You end up getting less usage across the board. And so what my developer, the reason I love working with him, is he helps us ensure that when we hear something from a customer, we go and validate that from a percentage of the same customer type before we
Mhm.
build anything. And so in our architecture, we made sure that it was very simple, very straightforward. And, as feature requests came in, we were always validating that from a bucket of customers. And I would say most of the time, 60% of the time, we don't move forward with a feature because we don't have a large enough customer base that's interested in that. And when I go back to the customer that asked for that and let them know, hey, this is what, we're hearing from other customers, this is how they're solving it, I am actually helping a feedback loop between, relative customers saying, hey, we understand this is what you're looking for, but this is how other agencies are handling it, and we're going to
Mhm.
keep it outside of our platform. And so being very conscientious in terms of what are we building and why, and how is that going to build onto our technical infrastructure and architecture is always front of mind for us. And so we have kept it very, very simple, and kept it very simple, which has kept high engagement in the tool. So I guess to kind of round that out is work with a good technical consultant that doesn't just build everything you ask, because if they're building everything you ask, you might want to, reconsider what you're looking for, and
Right.
make sure that what you build has a good enough backing behind it. And so that's been the principle that we've stayed with, and it's helped significantly. We have adjusted our architecture from different platforms, just for latency, and different security reasons. But I would say those are pretty standard. The reasons that we're moving for those, moving from platform to platform. But that's really the dev principle that we've stuck behind. Does that answer your question, Carlos?
Absolutely. No, you sure did. You sure did. I had to ask it because
Yeah.
uh, I am not an engineer myself, but there's some questions that are more coming from the layman's perspective, and I'm sure there's a lot of folks out there who are also interested in the nitty gritty of the technical mysteries and the looking under the hood and all that. So thank you for sharing those insights. There's something that I've been dying to ask you because it's obvious you also have an Adobe background. So what I would like to ask you is, how did Adobe shape how you built Know Your Force? Is there something you can share with us?
Yeah. I mean, it did come from me working. So I've always been in the partner org at Adobe, where I help partners that sell Adobe technology or integrate with Adobe technology. And so I've worked with the smaller partners, and I was running global sales training programs for them, and I was able to help them get recognized from all the training they were doing. And so that's really what kind of clicked initially, was like, oh, how do I help small agencies or an individual officer get recognized? So that's kind of where that parallel came from, is I was able to help smaller agencies get recognized. How can I help a single officer
Hmm.
get recognized? But outside of that, it definitely comes down to seeing all of the great technology in Adobe, and seeing all, the best of the best, if you will, and seeing what can fit in the very regulated private sector. And there are, very minimal technologies that meet the security requirements and can meet, the scale that agencies are looking for. And so I feel like my experience from seeing enterprise tools and seeing what's capable, as well as seeing how enterprise technology is architected, right? And kind of seeing, hey, these systems are architected for large customers, and those small customers can't get a good enough bang for their buck. And so how do I build something that can be, enterprise ready, but also mainly for those smaller agencies? And
Hmm.
so a few different pieces I've taken from my Adobe experience. But I would say those are some of the main ones. And then the dev principle, I've definitely tried to pull from seeing Adobe trying to build a minimal viable product, get it out, test it, and then after you get adoption, make changes from that. But yeah, my experience from the partner aspect, definitely I pulled from, in terms of how do we help the small guy.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's amazing and fascinating at the same time. So, but I guess I can still go on and on about asking specifically this component of your path. You know how Adobe shaped your force, but we unfortunately we have limited time. There's so many questions that I have for you. I wouldn't want to miss asking you about stakeholder management. So how does stakeholder management translate? Can you explain to us?
Yeah, the
What's
stakeholder management between a city and a county, that's what you're talking about, right? Not stakeholders with inside my
right?
company, the stakeholders within our customers.
Yeah, no, of course, yes.
Yeah. So within the cities, it is very different than within a county. A chief reports up to a mayor, and so if a mayor is looking for a technology, they can kind of just bring us in, and then the chief is kind of forced to work with us. And so
Hmm.
that stakeholdership is very interesting, because if you have just top down asking for something, you'll get it implemented, but sometimes you don't get great usage. And so what we've seen is we really like to lead with the chief, and then have the chief bring it, to the mayor. And if you can get the chief's buy-in, then you're going to get better usage, and you're going to get, better adoption, um, within the tool. And so the city construct can be, I would say, more complicated to kind of work with. But sometimes the mayor asks, we're brought in, the chief then understands why, and it works well.
Hmm.
But typically we like to try to get the chief on board, and have them bring this to the mayor,
Okay.
just because
Okay.
of the reporting structure and kind of the stakeholdership that we have there. So when stakeholdership changes, a lot can change as well. If a chief leaves, then they might write a different policy where this tool is enacted in different places. A mayor might leave, and then they're looking for, hey, if the police is using this, why doesn't the whole county or the whole city use this? And that's what we've seen. A few times we're brought in, we handle one specific use case, but then new leadership comes in and they say, hey, why don't we use this simple technology kind of across the board? And
Hmm.
so the different stakeholders can look at it a little bit differently. Um, on the flip side, the county, from what my experience has been over the last 6 years, is very different. They are, they really run their own show. And so if the sheriff likes it, they're good to go. Sometimes they'll bring in the county commissioners to review, more or less, but I wouldn't say they're as much of a stakeholder. If the sheriff is looking for something, the sheriff owns that business, and they make their own decisions. And so we do have a higher success rate, I would say, with working with counties, just because there's a smaller group of stakeholders, if you will, on kind of the initial decision making there. So does that answer your question, Carlos?
Yeah, it sure did. It sure did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Tell me about what you call predictive intelligence. Is there predictive intelligence in Know Your Force?
Yeah, I mean, we've always had sentiment analysis. I mean, even before AI was a thing, right? I mean, maybe you were hearing the AI term in 2020, but we've always had, sentiment analysis where if a common keyword is referenced, then, that can predict some kind of outcome. If you're always seeing in a review the word rude, then that is going to be a predictive insight that, hey, maybe you should pull this officer in. So I would say our analytics haven't changed drastically since 2020. And the main reason for that is we have, underlying basic analysis that we've been running, but typically our data flows into the city's LLM, their large language model. And that's where we're just one of many city data points that then get fed into the predictive analytics of how is the health of the city. So we have some at our level, but it's really always been, pretty standard stuff, based on tone of voice or based on, average rating. Outside of that, our data has to be combined with other data sources to be more predictive.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Thank you for elaborating on that.
Yeah.
We're approaching the final segment of today's conversation. So I wanted to ask you something. I mean, we have the government and we have the private sector. What would you say the private sector uh, hasn't learned from the government?
I think they kind of just run and run and run. And they're so eager to get things done fast. And there's so many different people that can provide technology for these private companies that, like, uh, kind of the underlying architecture isn't thought through sometimes. It doesn't have to go through as much scrutiny or reviews, security reviews. And so, I think there's just a higher risk in private sector companies and private sector technology because of the regulation. So I know a lot of people fight against that, but I actually see that if you can find the middle ground, having that thorough review process and ensuring that what you're doing is what you're paying for, that I think the private sector could definitely learn from, because the public sector is so budget constraint, and they have to put out a formal bid. They have so many formalities that sure do cause issues and cause things to be slow, but I would say that they typically get the right vendor in place. Rather than the private sector, everybody's trying to go so fast. Sometimes they choose the cheapest or someone that can implement it the fastest, and they miss out on stuff, and it can actually cause them more issues because they didn't think about all of the different the parameters that maybe they're looking for. And so I would say that's definitely what the private sector could look from. But I know the private sector has so much money, and so they kind of keep things going at such a high rate that I'm not sure if they'll be able to pull from some of those learnings.
Okay, cool. Before I ask you for some final words of wisdom for the audience, I wanted to ask you one more question about something in particular. How do you balance, or what can you tell us about balancing product vision and engineering quality?
Yeah, so it comes back to that principle of listening to the customer. I have a lot of ideas. I have a lot of thoughts. I have a lot of things that I would say, oh man, if they could just use this and do this and do these different things, I know it would, right? That's my perception because I'm in private sector, because I'm seeing so many different features and I'm seeing all of that. But I have to take that out, and I have to take myself out of the product vision, and I have to listen to the customer. And that has been my leading mantra, and it has got us where we're at today. And so if I'm listening to the customer, I have to really understand what are they trying to accomplish. And if I feel like my tool is a place to accomplish that, then I
Hmm.
bring that to another subset of customers and say, hey, this is what I'm hearing from this customer or these customers. Do you see that it would be applicable? And I go through that learning path again of help me understand how you're solving that problem today. And
Hmm.
about 40% of the time, we will build that feature in after we get a large enough, customer share to agree with it. But 60% of the time, I'm just knowledge sharing between customers saying, hey, I know you wanted to build that in. As I've talked to other customers, this is how they're solving for that. I would recommend you solve for that in a similar fashion. Um,
Hmm.
and so that's really been our guiding principle. But I try to stay out of the vision. I share possibilities. I share what our capabilities are. But then I listen and I really try to understand what are they trying to solve for? What are they actually trying to do? And then the first thing is our platform a place for that, or is there another? Are they trying to kind of shoehorn something into our product?
Gotcha.
But yeah, definitely try to take myself out of the vision and let the customers lead that, because the customers are going to be actually using it. If I'm trying to push features, I haven't seen
Yeah,
that.
I totally hear you. Okay, unfortunately, we're running out of time. So, do you have any final words of wisdom for the audience? Well, how would you define your industries? What is it going to look like in the next 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years?
Yeah. My words of wisdom are actually an ask of everybody. As we're continually in this series of crises that we're seeing happen in our country, use that as a time to think of an idea. Use
Hmm.
that as a time to solve a problem and to ask questions and to ideate. And you might not have the solution, but if you're asking questions to different people, a simple idea might surface, and please action that. I would definitely recommend that everybody follows their mission and build something that has a purpose rather than something that you think is just going to turn a buck.
Cool.
That has done me well, and that is really what I like to share with everybody else. Is, hey, you might not be able to solve the problem, but you might be able to collectively get enough ideas to maybe try something different. And if we try multiple things differently, we might find a solution for some of these problems that we don't think are solvable. So that would be my ask for everybody that's listening is stay engaged. Public sector needs our help, and there are funds available if the product fits, and you should spend time thinking about that.
Mhm.
So thank you for letting me share that, Carlos.
Absolutely, it's my pleasure. So, let's see, Scott. How can whoever's watching now or in the future, because we are recording this and we're going to be promoting it heavily, how can people get a hold of you? I mean, do you have any are you? I am assuming you are on LinkedIn as well, right?
Definitely. Yeah. So you can reach out to me via LinkedIn, just Scott Lowry. Yep. Appreciate you putting that up on the screen there. So definitely connect with me on LinkedIn. But if you're interested in connecting with me regarding our tool, you can go to our website, knowyourforce.com. Subscribe to our newsletter, or fill out the contact form, and I'd love to engage with you and answer any of your questions, or hear your ideas. If you've got ideas in public sector, I've got different avenues that.
Perfect. So, well, Scott, I mean, what can I tell you? It's been a pleasure to have you on the show today. I really look forward to following up and seeing what our viewers, like I said, either now or in the future, are going to say about what has been discussed here today. So the only thing left for me to do is thank you big time for having been with us on the show today. Okay, so and for those of you who are watching, like I said, now either live or in the future, please stay tuned and remember that on Wednesdays at 11 o'clock, we're gonna try to stick to the Central Standard Time. Despite all the daylight savings changes and all that, but we're gonna try to stick to 11 Central Standard Time. But again, stay tuned. If you want to learn more about what the show is about, just go to advancio.com, who is actually the sponsor of the show, which is right there, well, over there. Well, it always flips the image. It's right there.
Yeah.
Advancio.com, is the sponsor of Advancio Tech Talk. So, Scott, thank you so much, and I'll see you next time. Please stay with me as we go off the air. Until next time, folks.
Thank you, Carlos.
Thank you.